Hey, everybody, welcome to the Roosevelt Story. I'm Jeff Urbin, the education specialist at the Roosevelt Presidential Library and Museum, and I'm welcoming you to this session here in the new year, 2022. So I hope you guys all had a great holiday season and are getting through this winter as best you can. And here we are in January, a brand new year laying out before us. Now, January, right, the start of the new year, a fresh start full of hope and promise and expectations and possibilities. And we tend to lay these things out each year in the form of New Year's resolutions. Now, we're a couple of weeks into the year so far, so I think this is a good time to sort of go back a little bit and re-examine some of our New Year's resolutions that we may have made right at the end of last year and the beginning of this year. Now, if you're like me, you've probably given up on a lot of your New Year's resolutions already. And so this little session today is going to be designed to sort of inspire you to get back on those New Year's resolutions with the words of Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt. So this year I was all set, man. You know, after everything we've been going through the last couple of years, I was like, oh, I'm going to make my resolutions. I'm going to make my plans. It's going to be a great new year. And I got off to a really good start. So let me show you here. So, I started off here at the first and second day. Everything went really great. I got gold stars. And then I got to the third day and things were going also good. And then after that, I kind of just gave up and everything kind of went downhill from there. So this presentation is as much for me as it is for you. Now, I was going to lose weight, so I went to the gym, and the guy said that I didn't need he said, if you want to lose 10 pounds of ugly fat, you don't need to go to the gym. You need to rent a guillotine. Now, I'm not exactly sure what he meant by that, but I'm pretty sure it was not intended as a compliment. But the point is this: it's hard to keep these New Year's resolutions without the proper inspiration and motivation. And when you read about these things, how do you get started on a new thing? It's all about inspiration and motivation. And where do you find those in this day and age, right? Well, I always go back to my old stalwarts, Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt, right? These are my natural go-tos for motivation and inspiration. These two knew what it was like to face hard times and to have a need for inspiration and motivation, right? These guys were facing down the Great Depression and then the Second World War, and then trying to create a world body, the United Nations, that would prevent a Third World War. So when I was preparing for this, I read a lot of books and magazine articles and websites and things like that. And I boiled down a lot of what these guys were saying into some key points. And I want to share those with you. So in order to effectively have this, this good year start off with these great resolutions, there's a couple of key things we need to hit on. Number one is we've got to get started. Number two, we have to find that inspiration and motivation. Number three, we have to overcome fear. Number four, we have to have proper planning. Number five, we have to learn how to overcome the inevitable setbacks that are going to come. Number six, we need to know the importance of mentors and role models. And number seven, we need to build in benchmarks and rewards. So I'm going to address each of those topics over the next couple of minutes here with you, and we're going to draw on the words of Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt to illustrate these. Number one is getting started. Now, they say that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. But I say, why walk, right? We're in the 21st century. We've got trains and planes and Uber and those sorts of things. But I think they're kind of right? If you're going to get started, it begins with a single step. So maybe you've got some changes that you want to make or need to make in your life. Maybe you're in some sort of a dark or unhappy place or at least an uncomfortable place, and you want to move out of those places. Well, ask yourself this: is the dark or uncomfortable place that you're in as bad as a Great Depression? Or as bad as a world war? Probably not. And that's where our pals Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt found themselves, and that's where we begin this story. Now, Herbert Hoover, who was president before Franklin Roosevelt, said on March 4th, 1933, and I'm just telling you this to give you some perspective. Here's Hoover's approach. March 4th, 1933, Herbert Hoover says, "We are at the end of our string. There is nothing more we can do. Wrong. There's always something more you can do. And FDR pointed this out when he said at a speech at Oglethorpe University on May 22nd, 1932, he said, "This country needs, and unless I mistake its temper, the country demands bold, persistent experimentation. It is common sense to take a method and try it. If it fails, admit it frankly and try another. But above all, try something." So don't get overwhelmed this year with, a dozen new resolutions and things you're going to try to accomplish. Write that novel, run in that marathon. Start off small. Start with something, right? Something is better than nothing. It could be a new hobby. It could be a new recipe. Maybe it's a new way of going to work. Maybe it's going to work, right, with the pandemic and all. Find something that gets you excited and begin to get involved in that. Come up with a plan on how you're going to get there. Is it going to be something you're going to do by yourself? Is it something to do with people? Is it more fun to do as a group? Or is it something that, you can just start small and begin to build? That's the idea. Franklin Roosevelt said in the Forgotten Man speech on April 7th, 1932, "These unhappy times call for the building of plans that build from the bottom up, not from the top down, that put their faith once more in the forgotten man at the bottom of the economic pyramid." Now, he was talking about an economic crisis there, but what we're talking about here is a crisis of motivation. So start building those plans. Build the plans from the bottom up, not from the top down. Start small, begin to build. Next, you're going to want to commit or pledge to carrying through once you do begin. Let's not forget that FDR said, "I pledge you, I pledge myself to a new deal for the American people." And he said that in his Democratic National Convention acceptance speech on July 2nd, 1932. Now, notice he didn't say, "I hope" or "I intend." He said, "I pledge." Make it a commitment. Make it important. The important thing is to get started. Hop out of the rut. FDR warned us about that, and he understood that with the Great Depression. He understood that we had fallen into a rut and that we needed to do something to get out of it. And he said again, this nation asks for action and action now in his inaugural address. So whereas Hoover said, "We're at the end of our string, there's nothing more we can do," Roosevelt said, "Yeah, there is. We need to take action." Now, finding motivation and inspiration, as we've said, is very important. And FDR understood the meaning and the need to have a purpose in life. His New Deal programs were designed to create jobs. Right? Many of the programs, most of those programs were designed to create jobs. Now, these were more than simple job programs, right? And of course, you create jobs. The need to create jobs is because if you have a job, then you have a paycheck. And if you have a paycheck, you can go out and you can buy things. So you can begin to, let's say, go out and buy pizza, or maybe put a new back porch on the back of the house, right? You begin to spend that money, and then that stimulates the economy because the pizza guy's got to hire a new, waiter or waitress, and the carpenter needs to hire an assistant, and he goes to the lumber yard to buy wood, and it has this rippling effect. With one person, not so much, but when you have this multiplied by millions of people, it can really begin to lift the economy. Roosevelt understood how important that was from an economic standpoint. But even more important, he understood it from a spiritual perspective or an emotional perspective, because he understood that having a job gives us a purpose. Right? We identify ourselves by our jobs, right? I'm an educator. You're a banker. She's a baker. He's a lawyer. She's a doctor, right? These are our jobs. But if we lose our jobs, we lose a very important part of our identity. And that was one of the problems with the Great Depression. People lost their jobs and they had nothing to do each day. They had nothing to focus on, nothing to shape their day, nothing to go to, nothing to look forward to, nothing where they could go and make a contribution, to make a difference, and to have things actually take place and happen. So we tend to identify ourselves by our jobs. And Roosevelt said again in his inaugural address, "Our greatest primary task is to put people to work." So if you are looking for something to do this year, if you're finding yourself in the winter slump or the mid-pandemic slump, find something to do. Find yourself some work to do. Get yourself out there. He also said this is a great national crusade to destroy enforced idleness, which is an enemy to the human spirit generated by this depression. Now, we could change out depression and put in pandemic, right? This is a great national crusade to destroy enforced idleness, right? We're not out doing what we usually do, which is an enemy of the human spirit generated by this pandemic. So some of us are finding ourselves in these ruts, but we need to pull ourselves out, and we need to use Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt as our role models. Now, during the Second World War, FDR constantly spoke of the importance of purpose and the importance of contribution. He said in a fireside chat on December 29th, 1940, "We must be the great arsenal of democracy. For us, this is an emergency as serious as war itself. We must apply ourselves to our task with the same resolution, the same sense of urgency, the same spirit of patriotism and sacrifice as we would show if we were at war." Now, I'm not saying we need to go to that level in our own personal lives, but we certainly do need to commit ourselves to doing what we want to do and making it happen in this upcoming year. He also said in a fireside chat on April 28th, 1942, "There is one front and one battle where everyone in the United States, every man, woman, and child is in action. That front is right here at home in our daily lives, in our daily tasks." So again, what we're saying here is you don't need to go out and set the world on fire. You just need to get things moving a little bit for your own self right there at home, right there where you are. Maybe your desire this year is to quit smoking, right? That's a great one. You know, FDR was a big time smoker. And as I always like to tell the students, today he's dead. Think about that, okay? Can't argue with those facts. Roosevelt also said on April 28th, 1942, in a fireside chat, he said, "Whenever I hear anyone saying the American people are complacent, I feel like asking him to come to Washington to read the mail that floods into the White House. The one question that recurs through all these thousands of letters and messages is, what more can I do to help my country in winning this war? The achievement of victory requires the participation of all people in the common effort for our common cause." What is your common cause? What is the effort that you want to put forth this year? And when you find it, get working on it. Sometimes we have to overcome fear, right? Sometimes we're just afraid to get started. I don't know how to get started on this. I don't know if I should get started on this. I don't know if I'm going to be successful. Well, you never know if you're going to be successful, right? The Great Depression was ended through programs like the New Deal and ultimately by the Second World War. We never knew how these programs were really going to work out. We never knew really if they were going to work or how well they were going to work or to what extent they were going to work. And even our fighting in the war, right? It wasn't until 1943 that we really began to start racking up some successes. We had a lot of defeats from December 7th, 1941 all the way on up to around about mid-1943. But we never gave up, right? We kept moving, we kept going, we kept finding new ways, we kept trying new things, and that's what we need to do. Now, overcoming fear, right? You might say that, I'm hesitant, I'm fearful of doing this. Well, Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt found themselves in that situation many, many times throughout their lives. The difference between them and most people is that when they felt the fear, they acknowledged it, they pushed past it, they moved forward, and they found a way around it. And Franklin Roosevelt reminded us of that on his very first couple of minutes as President of the United States, when he said so famously, "First of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself." Feel the fear, but do it anyway. Go ahead and do what you need to do. Eleanor Roosevelt, in a book she wrote in 1963 titled "Tomorrow is Now," she said, "We must know what we think and speak out, even at the risk of unpopularity. In the final analysis, a democratic government represents the sum total of the courage and integrity of its individuals. It cannot be better than they are. In the long run, there is no more exhilarating experience than to determine one's position, state it bravely, and then act boldly. Okay, so again, find out what you're afraid of, find out what you want to do, and move forward. She also went on to say that I was an exceptionally timid child, afraid of the dark, afraid of mice, afraid of practically everything. Painfully, step by step, I learned to stare down each of my fears. Only then was I really free. And then she said about Franklin, I think the thing that took the most courage in his life was his mastery and meeting of polio. She went on to say, courage is more exhilarating than fear, and in the long run, it is easier. So you need to overcome that fear. Now, fear is natural, right? And but it has to be tamed, it has to be overcome, and it has to you have to begin to move forward from that. Now, of course, many of us found ourselves in economic problems during the Great Depression, right? 25% unemployment in the country, 25% underemployment, right? So it's kind of stayed with us, some of that stuff, right? We are always finding ourselves a little too much month left at the end of the money, right? At least if you're like me, you do. And so we need to be more careful about how we do our spending over the next year. Now, I am not a certified financial advisor. I cannot give you financial advice. Legally, I can't do that. But I like to think that I've done pretty good for myself. I started out with nothing, and I still have most of that left. So I'm going to quote here when President Roosevelt said that there must be a strict supervision of all banking and credits and investments so that there will be an end to speculation with other people's money. Other people's money, what about your money? Right? Take a look at your banking situation. Take a look at what you're spending your money on. Take a look at what you're investing in and make that money work for you. That's the important thing that we need to do here. Keep your planning realistic, right? As you are laying out these New Year's resolutions, these goals for yourself over the coming months. Eleanor Roosevelt once said, you don't have to become a hero overnight, right? You don't have to become a hero overnight. Try something, see if it works. If it's successful, keep going. If it's not working for you, try something else. Accept that you're going to mess up from time to time, right? If you mess up, fess up, and then get back on it and make it happen. Find out what you did wrong, find ways to make it work, and find ways to move yourself forward from there. President Roosevelt, at his signing of the Social Security Act, said, we can never insure 100% of the population against 100% of the hazards of life, but we have tried to frame a law which will give some measure of protection to the average citizen and to his family against loss of job and against poverty-ridden old age. You can't plan for everything. There's going to be things that happen. There's going to be things that occur that you had no way of knowing, right? This pandemic, who would have been able to predict this just a few years ago? When Franklin Roosevelt was at Campobello that summer and he went upstairs to go to bed and wasn't able to walk the next morning, he had no idea how that morning would change the rest of his life. And so we need to make plans, but keep in mind that life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans. Be able to be flexible, be able to adjust, be able to move forward. And please don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good enough. Sometimes you just have to get things moving and get things started. And maybe it's not the perfect solution, but you can begin to work more toward that. When Franklin Roosevelt came back from Yalta and was talking with members of the State Department, they weren't overjoyed with some of the proposals and some of the conclusions that had been reached at Yalta. And Roosevelt turned to them and said, I didn't say the result was good. I said it was the best I could do. And sometimes that's all you can do. He also went on to say, we are now in this war. We are all in it all the way. Every single man, woman, and child is a partner in the most tremendous undertaking of our American history. We must share together the bad news and the good news, the defeats and the victories, the changing fortunes of war. Things are going to go wrong. How do you correct it? Find out what went wrong, fix it, move on. We've already tasted defeat, he said. We may suffer further setbacks. We must face the fact of a hard war, a long war, a bloody war, a costly war. A very good friend of mine used to say all the time that you got to remember, this is not a sprint, it is a marathon. And those words that he said to me on many, many occasions help put in perspective the fact that, you know what, you've got to be in it for the long haul. You really have to move forward and understand that you need to keep some of your powder dry as you move forward and as you go down the way. And as you do this, as you do the best you can, Eleanor Roosevelt reminds us that you gain strength, courage, and confidence by every experience in which you really stop to look fear in the face. You must do the thing you cannot do, and that will make you stronger, and that will make you more successful. Now, you also need to find some role models and some mentors. And hopefully this whole talk so far has been an example of how Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt can be role models for you. And I'm just giving you these quotes that I've kind of, picked out of their words and speeches over the years. If you go to our website, if you go to our museum, you can find out a lot of ways and a lot more ways that the Roosevelts applied themselves to solving problems and moving forward. I'm just scratching the surface here, but you can come to us and learn more about that. Keep in mind that you're not alone, right? Find yourself a partner or a role model or a mentor that you can learn from, that you can work with as a partner. That's what the Roosevelts did. We didn't win World War II by ourselves. We won it along with Great Britain, and we won it along with the Soviet Union and the other 22 or so nations that were part of the Allied coalition, or as Roosevelt referred to them often, the United Nations. And the Roosevelts were not afraid to have mentors, or not afraid to have people that they held up as heroes or role models. Eleanor Roosevelt had a very important one, Madame Silvestri, who was the head mistress of the Allenwood School, where she went to school in England. It was basically a high school sort of finishing school sort of thing. And Madame Silvestri saw in Eleanor Roosevelt those traits, those attributes, the spark, the courage, the compassion, the intelligence that nobody had really seen or recognized in Eleanor Roosevelt up to that point. Madame Silvestri did, and she encouraged Eleanor Roosevelt to speak her mind, to write about her thoughts, to challenge her assumptions, and to expand herself, to travel, to talk, to learn all that she could about what was going on in the world. And she took that seed that Mrs. Roosevelt had, and she nourished it, and it blossomed. It blossomed for the good of Mrs. Roosevelt, and for the good of the rest of this country, and for the good of the rest of the world. So find that mentor, that person who sees in you maybe something you don't see yourself, or maybe that you see yourself, but you need some encouragement in helping to bring out. Now, Franklin Roosevelt found encouragement from a couple of different places. One of his personal political heroes was none other than Woodrow Wilson. And he was actually, Roosevelt was the one who put Woodrow Wilson's name in nomination for the presidency when Woodrow Wilson won. And he was rewarded by being appointed to be the Assistant Secretary of the Navy. So Roosevelt used Wilson as sort of a role model, and he patterned the United Nations after Wilson's failed attempt at the League of Nations. He understood the mistakes and problems that had been sort of baked into the League of Nations, Roosevelt did, and he corrected those, and he moved forward with those, taking the idea of a League of Nations, turning it into a United Nations, and that body is still in existence today. So Woodrow Wilson, one of FDR's heroes. Another hero closer to home, literally, was none other than his Uncle Teddy. And Franklin Roosevelt really admired Uncle Teddy, as did Eleanor Roosevelt. And he was a favorite relative of both of theirs. In fact, Franklin Roosevelt consciously set a task and a goal to achieve everything that Teddy Roosevelt had achieved in his career. And just as Teddy Roosevelt was a state senator from New York, Franklin Roosevelt was a state senator from New York. Just as Teddy Roosevelt was the governor of New York, Franklin Roosevelt was governor of New York. Just as Teddy Roosevelt had been assistant secretary of the Navy, Franklin Roosevelt was assistant secretary of the Navy. Just as Teddy Roosevelt had been a vice presidential candidate, Franklin Roosevelt was a vice presidential candidate, an unsuccessful one, but nonetheless, he held the position on the ticket. And of course, he went on to become president of the United States, just like Teddy Roosevelt had been. In fact, I think the only job that Franklin Roosevelt didn't have that Teddy Roosevelt had was New York City police commissioner. So find a role model and pattern your career, pattern your goals, pattern where you want to go after that person as well. And then another person that Franklin Roosevelt kind of turned to for advice and information was none other than Louis Howe. And Louis Howe was a grizzly old newspaper man from Albany, New York, who looked something like a troll. Franklin's mother couldn't stand the man, but he was full of street smarts and common sense. And he gave President Roosevelt an unvarnished view of what he needed to do to succeed with ordinary folks. And Franklin Roosevelt, could have been offended by that. Oh, who's this newspaper guy telling me, or Roosevelt, how to conduct myself? But he was smart about it, and he understood this man has things that he can teach me, things that I can learn from. And so he did. So Louis Howe is another one of Roosevelt's special mentors. Now, a lot of times, we need a place that we can just go to, right? A place where we can be ourselves. Remember Cheers? Sometimes you want to go where everybody knows your name. Well, we may not have a local bar to be able to do that, or maybe we do. But what you need is some special place, some place where you can go, where you can be in your own head, where you can be in your own mind, where you can be in your own emotions, and you can draw the strength from that place, whatever it is, wherever it is, and whoever you find around there. And for Franklin Roosevelt, this was none other than the Hudson Valley here in Hyde Park and here in the Hudson Valley, Dutchess County, New York. He said in a nomination, in a letter agreeing to the nomination for the fourth term on July 11th, 1944, he said, "All that is within me cries out to go back to my home on the Hudson River, to avoid public responsibilities and to avoid also the publicity which in our democracy follows every step of the nation's chief executive." He needed a special place that he could get to, a place where he could recharge, a place where he could let his hair down, a place where he could let his guard down. And for him, that was right here in Dutchess County. And if you go even a bit smaller, it was a place called Top Cottage, which the National Park Service, our friends at the National Park Service, operate Top Cottage, which was FDR's retirement home. He originally envisioned it as a lean-to on top of a hill, one of his favorite hills where he would picnic. And he loved to go up there. He could see the Hudson Valley from there. It was a beautiful place. There were birds, there was a breeze, gorgeous trees. And he could go up there and find solitude and rest. And he enjoyed it so much that he began sketching out this little lean-to, and then one thing led to the other, to the next, to the next, to the next. And he ultimately designed a small cottage for himself. So check with our friends, the National Park Service's website, and you can see when Top Cottage might be open. You can go and see that special place that Roosevelt drew strength from there as well. And then finally, you need to be able to give yourself a reward, right? There needs to be a reward for your hard work. Now, very often I've found that the reward for hard work is more work. But I think sometimes, you need to be able to stop along the way, take a moment and let the success, let the lessons of that success, let the joy, the pride, the experience of that success soak through you and soak within you and give you strength to carry on. If you were able to complete that, you ought to be able to complete the next thing. But if you're constantly looking on to the next thing and not taking stock of what you've been able to accomplish and how you were able to accomplish that, it's going to be more difficult for you to do that. And Franklin Roosevelt famously said on March 12th, 1933, "I think this would be a good time for beer." Now, I'm not condoning that, right, because this is a family presentation. But maybe treat yourself to something. Maybe it's a milkshake. Maybe it's 20 minutes with your favorite book. Maybe it's a walk in your favorite park, or a phone call with an old friend, something like that. Find some way to make fun in your life. Find some way to make some space for yourself to be able to enjoy. Remember, we're human beings, not human doings. Right. So while I'm telling you to, get motivated and get out there and make it happen, remember to take some time and just, be able to be yourself as well. Now, I want to share with you, before we go, a little document that I have here. This is, how every morning you get up, and I don't know about you, but every morning I get up and I make a to-do list. Right here's going to be my to-do list. I want to share with you Franklin Roosevelt's I think it's May 31st, 1935, I think it is, to-do list. So here's what Franklin Roosevelt's going to do. He's going to have an agricultural adjustment amendments. He's going to do a transportation bill, Social Security, Tennessee Valley Authority, a coal bill, holdings companies bill, Wagner bill, labor bill, and a tax bill. So this is what FDR had on his list of things to do for 1935. I'm not saying yours has to be that ambitious. Maybe it's just getting that container of whatever the hell that used to be on the back shelf of the refrigerator out of there so you have room for other things, right? Nobody even knows what that thing is anymore. It resembled food at one point, but not any longer. Maybe just getting that out of the way is the thing to do. Maybe just getting rid of some of the clutter around your house is the thing to do. You don't have to pass the Wagner Labor Act in order to call it a successful year. Plan what you want to plan, figure out what you want to do, find ways to do it, and then go from there. Now, there will be difficulties. You're going to face difficulties, but you can overcome them. It's still only January. There is still plenty of time to get started, to make some plans, to set some goals, to pledge to achieve those goals, to face down some fears, to push through some setbacks, to find yourself a mentor and a role model, and to set up some rewards for yourself. And no matter how bad things are, they can always get better. That is the underlying lesson of the Roosevelts. I always like to say that Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt were futurists. And what I mean by that is they were always looking to the future. They were always looking not where they were, but where they wanted to be. And they weren't Pollyannas about where they were. They understood we're in a Great Depression. They understood we're in a world war. Franklin understood I can't stand up and walk around on my own. But they always envisioned where they wanted to be, took stock of where they were, envisioned where they wanted to be, and then they began to build roadways and channels and networks to get to where it was that they wanted to be. That's the way the Roosevelts did it. Now, no matter how down you are, no matter how out you are, you can get back in the game. You can always get up. And if you don't believe me, that's fine. But you've heard it through the words of Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt. Listen to them, learn from them, and live the best life that you can. Take those lemons life has handed you and squeeze them into lemonade. Okay, it's not the only way, but it is the Roosevelt way. Now let's take a look at what we have here in terms of questions or comments over here in the chat. I saw a lot of them coming in, but I'm not able to go over here and read as quickly as I can see. Let's see. Yep. Okay. Here's all right. Some folks saying hello. Great John Lennon quote. Yes. I threw John Lennon in there too. FDR was the best leader in the world. I'm not going to argue with that. Certainly one of the best. Thanks for joining us today. Oh, that's us asking you guys. Let's see. Danny's saying, hey, Skip being vice president went right for president. Sure, right? Why, take the second position when you can go right on to the top? FDR put people first. He died in office fighting to protect the world from the evils. He turned the U.S. from the poorest country in the world to the Great Depression into a superpower. That's a great point you just made right there. And there's something that needs to be reminded about that. People, especially when it comes to the war, we look back and we say, well, why didn't he do this? Or how come he did that? Or why didn't that happen? Or why didn't this happen? And we tend to forget that the United States that came out of that war, the Second World War, was not the same United States that went into that war. Okay. But over the course of that war, we grew, we built, we learned, we planned, we accomplished, and we began to move forward. And it's the same thing if you go back another couple of years to the Great Depression. The Great Depression in the United States in 1933 was not the same Great Depression in the United States in 1939, right? We planned, we grew, we learned, and we moved on from those things. And that's exactly the moral of this story. You don't have to be perfect out of the gate. What you have to do is keep working and keep looking. Okay. What's my favorite Eleanor Roosevelt quote? Well, here's my favorite. I have two favorite Eleanor Roosevelt quotes. The first is, I know that's kind of cheating because you only asked me if I had one, but the first one is, I love, and I'm going to paraphrase it, but it's this idea where she's talking about human rights. And she says that human rights begin in small places, so small they can't be seen on a map or on a globe. They begin where we are. And I love that quote because what it means is it's a challenge. The challenge to you and a challenge to me to make the world a better place. What I believe Mrs. Roosevelt's saying in that quote is, you don't have to be the president of the United States. You don't have to be head of the United Nations. You don't have to be first lady or Eleanor Roosevelt or anybody big or powerful or fancy to begin to make the world a better place right where you are, in that little place that can't be seen on a map or a globe. It can be in your home. It can be in your classroom. It could be in your school. It could be in your community. It could be in your faith community. It could be in your state, your county, your country. And what this means is that she's challenging each of us to be the best we can be and be compassionate and be hopeful and be helpful wherever we are. And if you're doing that where you are and I'm doing that where I am, then the world becomes a better place. And we don't have to be big and powerful and rich and mighty in order to do that. We can just be who we are, doing what we can, where we can. So that's my first favorite Eleanor Roosevelt quote. And my second one is one I said a moment ago, which is, you don't have to become a hero overnight. And what I love about that Eleanor Roosevelt quote is it gives us permission to fail. You know, a lot of the stuff I was reading about with New Year's resolutions was that, you know, people set up these resolutions, they set up these diets, and it's a win or lose, right? If I don't lose 10 pounds, I'm a failure. If I don't, you know, clean out the garage by April, I'm a failure. And that's not true at all. Okay. It's not true at all. What it means is you have to keep trying. Okay. So rather than have it be a win or a lose, let it be a progression, right? You don't have to become a hero overnight. So what if I don't get the garage cleaned out by April? Maybe I get it cleaned out by August or September. So what if I don't lose 10 pounds in the next, 6 months? Maybe I can lose 3 pounds, and that's better for me than losing none. So those are my two favorite Eleanor Roosevelt quotes. Let's see. Oh, here's somebody saying they've actually had some Eleanor Roosevelt quotes tattooed on their arms for daily inspiration. That's great. I'm not saying you got to go that far, but that's awesome. Okay. FDR, handicap and illness inspires my own handicap chronic illness. Never stop fighting. There's nothing to fear but fear itself. That is exactly right. There's nothing to fear but the limits that we put upon ourselves. And today's talk was hopefully inspirational in this, cold winter in the middle of this pandemic, hopefully closer to the end than the middle. And we just wanted you to know that, those of us here at the Roosevelt Presidential Library, we're with you. Right? We're here. That's why we've been doing these programs for the last 2 years. We want you to understand that you're not in this alone. We want you to understand that we're all in this together. We want you to understand that right here in our own community, we had two outstanding people, Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt. They weren't perfect, but they were certainly inspirational. They were certainly motivational. And if you find yourself in a situation where you think you've got it rough, pick up a book, go to our website, shoot me an email, and I can tell you all about, or that book can tell you all about, or a website can tell you all about a more difficult challenge that the Roosevelts went through, and they were able to work it through. Yes, they had help. Yes, they had resources, and so do you. You just need to find them. You need to make use of them, and we all need to move together and move forward. So I'm going to leave it at that. So thanks, everybody. Readjust your sails here, as Roosevelt would say, and get on with your new year. Let's make 2022 a much better place. And we can do that right where we are with the resources that we have if we just get started. Thanks very much, and we'll see you again later on.